Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's FENG IT SIG. We're going to discuss today, we're going to have a discussion today on the supply chain update, and we are fortunate to have two speakers with us, both coming from Grant Thornton. Our first speaker is Tyler Davis, who's the Manager of Transformation Advisory, and then we have Gerry Cahill, who's the Director of Sourcing and Supply Chain Practices. Before I let our speakers introduce themselves and have them get started, just want to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. What we will do is any questions that you have, please, type them in the chat. I'll keep an eye out for that as our speakers are giving their presentation, and then we'll bring up those questions most likely at the end of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting. But if there's a particular topic that seems, really that needs a little bit more explanation, the speakers will, talk about that as well. But so yeah, any questions, just let me know. And then if your questions need any follow-up, just unmute yourselves at that time if they ask. And then you can, speak directly. During the presentation, everybody except the speakers will be on mute just to avoid any background noises. And Charlotte's going to help us manage that process. So without further ado, Tyler, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we're really excited to be here with the Financial Networking Executives Group and to talk supply chain today, which has certainly been a big topic of conversation. Again, my name is Tyler Davis, and I'm a manager in the Transformation Advisory practice of Grant Thornton. So Grant Thornton does audit, tax, and advisory, and I particularly sit in the sourcing and supply chain group with Gerry Cahill, who's accompanying me today. We deal with clients from all different types of industries, consumer products, industrial products, automotive, e-com, retail, healthcare. But, across those different industry verticals, supply chain continues to be a main, topic of conversation in the boardrooms. As we continue the recovery path from the pandemic. I've been in consulting for close to 5 years now. Previously, I was in the transportation industry and also in the 3PL space, working there as well. So have been in, like I said, consulting for close to 5 years now. I typically deal with within the four walls. So everything from manufacturing, distribution, logistics, do some network design type work. And looking forward to talking to everyone about disruptions and disruptive forces in supply chain today. Some different tactics that the C-suite is doing to mitigate these forces. And then, of course, give some industry perspectives as we go. So, Gerry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Gerry Cahill. Unlike Tyler, I have been in consulting for close to 35 years. In the midst of that, I have gone out on my own and sat on the other side of the table and was one of 5 founders of a solar manufacturing company that we made the silicon substrate for solar cells that end up getting into solar panels. So I did that for a few years and then returned to consulting because I love it so much. And I've been consulting in supply chain for, like I say, about 35 years. One of several of the things that companies that I have worked for have gone on to bigger and better things. Like one that I re-engineered their entire supply chain was Samsung Electronics. And they had a goal of beating Sony, which ultimately they ended up beating Sony. So been around doing that for a while. My focus is in manufacturing, but I've done a lot of work in the supply channels, especially in consumer electronics, consumer goods, but also in the food and beverage industry, as well as in healthcare and nutraceuticals, as opposed to pharmaceuticals. So let's quit talking about ourselves, Tyler, and let's get into the meat of this.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gerry. All right. So what we wanted to start out with was talk about some of the top supply chain issues facing our clients today. And like I said, we work with a multitude of different industries and client sizes, everything from 100 million in annual revenue to 4 or 5 billion in annual revenue is pretty much where we kind of work with. But looking at like a lot of the disruptive forces, you have everything from, of course, the rising supply chain costs, risk and supply chain disruption and labor shortages, which is definitely a big effect. Aside from those, SKU proliferation, the omni-channel effect, M&A activity is increasing, and there's definitely a strong focus on supply chain digitization. One index we wanted to show too was the Global Supply Chain Pressure Index. And what this is this was a new measurement created by the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And this index combines variables from several, different indices across transportation, manufacturing, those related to delivery times, prices, and inventory. So it pulls from like the Baltic Dry Index, the HARPEX Index, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, et cetera. So you can kind of see here, how the supply chain pressure has significantly increases during COVID. There are some signs that, there's improvement in the supply chain. But certainly we're all still feeling the effects, especially from material shortages and different inflationary pressures. So, I think one thing too is certainly it's not specifically relayed on this chart is the material shortages across different commodities. And also like the geopolitics that come into play too, that, impact the different commodity groups. Personally speaking, what I see in my clients the most are labor shortages and material shortages. And a lot of that is stemming from kind of the spike in demand. Gerry, anything to add from your vantage point?
Yeah, exactly. As Tyler is saying, the three solid points up there, the rising supply chain costs and risk supply. Obviously, fuel costs are up, and they're up globally. So what we're finding is that just the movement of the product on the ocean is about 3 times what it was a year ago. Risk and supply chain disruption. We've got a lot of ships that have set sail, but have not reached port. And if they can't reach port, they can't go back for other shipments. So we've got assets on the water that are not being as efficient as possible. Labor is a very big problem, not only here in the States, but all over the world. We experience a lot of times now where we're over the span of 5 days in the week, over a span of 5 days in the week, we may have fluctuations in the labor that shows up to work by as much as 45%, 45 to 50%. So if half of your workforce is in one day and gone the next day, you can imagine the problems that brings up. And it brings up slower movement. It brings up the lack of the ability to ship on time. I always use a factor of OTIF, which is on time in full, and that metric has suffered the most in the last 24 to 36 months.
Yep. Another piece too that Gerry and I have been seeing a lot with our clients is concerns around master data, and especially you see this with clients that are growth by acquisition. So taking vendor master data, item master data, and having that into in a format or a standard that you can use that data to drive volume discounts, to drive or to get good forecast, good supply plans. That's become a big concern, and a lot of what we've done at Grant Thornton is help clients with different master data management strategies and governance policies, especially those that help enable better supply chain planning.
Yeah, I currently have 6 clients that I am working with, and in the past 10 days, master data is the key piece of their supply chain woes. Bad data, we've known it for years and years and years. Bad data equals bad decisions. And one of the worst decisions that we can do is when we get into managing our customers, managing our products, and then managing our vendors. Because together, if we don't know our capabilities in our vendor supply, we lose track of our inventory. We lose track of what we're buying, and we lose track of our of the amount of money that we're spending to get there. Obviously, we need to know about our customers, because our customers are changing fast, and our competitors are always looking to detract us from our customers. So the more data that we have, the better that data is. It becomes very important for us to manage through the supply chain.
Yep, absolutely, Gerry. And we'll get into this on the next slide here, and you can see, some of the big themes that companies are doing to really get a hold on, some of these disruptive issues. Everything from defining your total supply chain cost to serve, right? Dynamic pricing by customer. So a lot of what we see now is supply is or demand is exceeding supply. So with dynamic pricing, not only dynamic pricing, but also like customer segmentation to help drive a lot of different allocation policies certainly helps. We've been seeing that. And then treating inventory as a multi-echelon system. So looking at balancing your supply with demand by, what your demand looks like from a geographic basis, but also considering, different inventory deployment strategies, whether that's having that at a centralized warehouse location where maybe your fixed costs will go down, but your transportation costs go up, or having a more regional, distribution strategy. And then kind of with the omni-channel effect, right? So looking at your order fulfillment differentiation, looking at the different customer segments. Are there other channels to pursue? Is there, with the Amazon effect, can you go e-com? And then last mile delivery, the consumer preferences continue to shift and continue to increase every day. So a lot of focus on last mile delivery, having visibility over those last mile delivery segments, but also making sure that the customers are serviced in a manner that meets your goals, and then, of course, retains those customers. So we'll pan over to the next piece here, and you can kind of see, okay, what are the value drivers when it comes to looking for different mitigation strategies or different, solutions and mitigating these disruptive factors and enhancing your supply chain. So there's really 4 pieces that we try to really serve or enable when we look at these different actions, right? So it's about revenue growth, operating margin, asset efficiency, working capital. You can see here, the different value levers, and these are really all from like, a supply chain perspective, right? You have everything from inventory, optimizing 3PL rates, improving your yield, optimizing the labor and the resources that you have, things around from a manufacturing perspective, right? So improving the changeovers, looking at your product mix, and then, like I said earlier, customer segmentation. So these are a few different, value levers that can be deployed to really meet some of those drivers that we discuss here in this first box. But when we think about today, the top 10 actions that we see the C-suite doing, we can see here, it's mostly around tightly integrating the supply chains and really looking to recalibrate your supply chain strategy. Like I said, looking at how you position inventory in your network, making sure that, the cost is balanced with the service, quantifying those supply chain costs to serve, right? So understanding your margins, to really drive pricing decisions. A big focus now you'll see is, around, like I said, the integration. So looking to improve forecasting and planning, with your customers and vendors. And a lot of things we've seen are, additional investments in different technologies or, reporting applications to really help drive that forecasting and planning, because the traditional forecasting methods, don't hold as much weight as they used to, right? So companies are trying to become a little bit more forward looking, as they plan inventory and, put together their supply plans. So you'll see, more investment in technology, and you'll see companies look to, excel their digital maturity. As always, communication and partnership with vendors and customers is absolutely key. To consider, how you continue to navigate these challenges. And then, also measuring supplier risk on direct spend. So having, like I said, good communication partnership, but also having, SLA agreements, quarterly reviews, supplier scorecards, making sure that, you're getting the inventory when it was promised. Gerry, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, the big ad for me that I have seen with my clients is that it has to be to get to getting your supply chain in order is a deliberate process, and it's falls on the C-suite to employ whatever means they have to be able to deliberately look at these actions and start mindfully understanding what their strategies are. A lot of times, the supply chain drags our C-suites through the problem. Where if we are in front of the problem and we're in front of what we're trying to be, we can actually become the disruptor. If I've got a very good control over my supply chain, I can then start moving quicker than my competitor and start taking away his advantages that he may have on me. But you can't, as in the C-suite, the folks that I have seen who have taken control of theirs have moved on into bigger and better things. Like during this period of time, they're finding ways to maybe buy their competitor. I was just last week up in Wisconsin with a client doing a carve out due diligence, where the buying client basically said, we've got our inventories under control, we've got our cash in control, we're not losing, we've lost some of our ability to deliver quickly, but that's external to our company. but we're selling a lot more than our competitors have, and we're now able to go in and take a look at buying them.
Yeah. And I think to add to that too, I mean, there's certainly, not only from vertical integration, but there's a lot more contemplation around the insourcing versus, or I'll say onshoring versus offshoring.
Yes.
And it all comes down to what is the total cost to serve? What are the risks, right?
Yep.
It's just a lot of balancing factors. And then I know, Gerry, you've had a few clients and done some work around that. Do you want to talk about that piece?
Exactly. Yeah. There's I was just talking with a client about 35 minutes ago. There has been over the past 20 years or so, there's been a lot of manufacturing that had been offshored. Kind of the thing that I've seen that is the straw that broke the camel's back on stopping that was the shortages of integrated circuits that we saw late last year and early this year, where we shut down automotive lines because we didn't have enough integrated circuits to make the cars. That has started to really bring some of the dependence on that industry that had been handed to the Chinese, and it's starting to bring it back to nearshoring operations in Mexico, and also to operations in Korea and Taiwan, to start making sure that that we don't have a dependency on one country for a commodity. And a lot of activity with some of my high-tech customers are starting to move in that direction to get that supply chain back under our control. So that is a major new play that's starting to happen, and you'll hear it as reshoring or nearshoring
Yep.
as a topic of discussion.
Yep. Thanks, Gerry. And one thing I want to add too is, you've heard me talk about supply chain digitalization and making investments in your digital maturity. But one thing at Grant Thornton that we really try to drive is people, process, technology. And people and process come before technology. You never want to automate or replicate a bad process and not get a good return on investment with any technology investments. So you'll see here in the kind of the critical value levers, you'll see things around procure to pay or AP improvement and order to cash optimization, right? And those things are critical in understanding where your current state is, understanding where you want to take a future state or where you want to go, future state. So defining what your processes are, what they should be, understanding your gaps, right? And really looking to, improve your processes, take the cost out, take the resource dependency out, right? Because we're all resource constrained. So, really, putting a focus on people and process, before you make those technology investments.
Yeah. And I would add that the most important of those is your people. I have seen in the last 18 months or so companies that have been decimated because their employees are moving on, and they've had a lot of opportunity to move on. It's definitely an employee's market to be pulled away from other companies. So however the C-suite can make sure that they're making sure that the employee is a happy, healthy member of that organization is definitely worth money being spent on it.
Yeah, yeah. And we've seen a lot of interesting things too, especially on the people front. I mean, I think employee retention right now is absolutely key, especially in like manufacturing environments. I've seen where, of course, the you know, companies doing a sign-on bonus, but also for if you have a perfect attendance, you get a attendance bonus. But I've also seen too where companies are now doing things like, hey, if you have a perfect attendance or you work X days, you enter in a raffle for a free car. So companies are getting a little bit more creative now because the hiring landscape has become much more competitive. You'll see a lot of times too, and a lot of my clients where you spend so much time onboarding employees or training different operators to run certain production lines or machines, and before you know it, next week they're jumping ship and going to another company that's paying a few more cents, right? And it's just become such a competitive landscape that, to Gerry's point, there definitely needs to be a focus on people, and it's certainly okay to get a little creative with incentivizing your employees.
Exactly. A certified forklift driver, to bring a new one on usually costs, other than outside of his or her salary, just to train them up and get them certified to drive a fork truck, is probably $10,000 to $15,000. So there's money to be saved and money and cost to be avoided by keeping your people happy.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, I'm going to pan over to the next slide here. So one thing we wanted to call out too was, just some leading indicators for supply chain issues, right? So, you come in and you look at the financials, you look at the different metrics, and you're saying, okay, what is a leading indicator to some of the supply chain issues, right? And some of the things that we look at are cash cycle days, like I said earlier, the total supply chain cost to serve, and then of course customer satisfaction. So, looking at the first one, right, cash conversion is absolutely key, and those things that to look at are DSO, or day sales outstanding, days of inventory on hand, payables outstanding, and then your WAC, your weighted average cost of capital. Supply chain cost to serve, right? You want to minimize cost. And a few ways to do that is customer segmentation, SKU rationalization, dynamic pricing, looking at your order fulfillment logic. I do want to touch on this one a little bit. And, I talked about customer segmentation, but also I want to talk about SKU rationalization a little bit. So one thing that we try to help clients understand is, with the material shortages in play, you're going to have, you might have a backlog of product or a backlog of orders because you're waiting on that one final material, or you're waiting on, a few different components to come in. So, we try to work with clients to take a look at your SKU portfolio and say, okay, can we reduce the SKUs and focus on ones that, bring in more margin, bring in more revenue, right? But I think the main point here is not only trying to grow margin with SKU wrap, but also trying to take more complexity out of the business. When you have a SKU portfolio with SKUs that are slow movers, that's just one more thing, or another set of products that your buyers or planners have to be hovering over on a day-to-day basis to make sure that they have those final materials, right? So you want their effort and time really focus on the SKUs that bring in either the revenue or the margin that you're looking at. Another big piece too is, like I said, the customer satisfaction, looking on the right. So there's different things you can do is understanding the voice of the customer, gross margin return on investment, understanding the service commitments, right? So what are those service levels like? And then the collaborative planning. One thing that we see a lot too is called collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. So there's a lot of, and this kind of goes back to tighter integration with supply chains. So, working with your vendors to say, okay, here's what our forecast looks like in the next 13 weeks, 3 months, whatever your forecast, horizon looks like, and really understanding, okay, do you guys have the inventory or have the supply to support, what our forecast looks like? And understanding what their inventory position is like, understanding what their capacity is like, earlier on, helps you identify any risk in the process. So that will help you understand, okay, do I need to, source from an alternative supplier? Do I need to augment capacity in a certain way? Do I need to build on my inventory sooner, et cetera? So Gerry, I'll let you add to this too.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I can add to this is if you look at every one of the bullet points in every one of those 3 boxes, the best way to be able to manage those from a standpoint of a management overview is you need 2 things. You need strong processes, as Tyler was saying. And I'll go back. The second thing you need is what we talked about earlier in the conversation here. If with bad data, you cannot make good decisions on these issues, if you will. So the best thing here, you have to know your inventory to manage your supply chain. I mean, it is a given. Real good managers will know their inventory on the top of their head. They don't have to go look at anything. They'll say, I've got 85% of my inventory is usable right now, and I'm missing 15% of my raw material inventory to be able to make what I've got scheduled. But all of these things need data, but all of these things start helping to minimize the cost. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to minimize costs and control costs, or at least know where our costs are. And that once we know where our costs are, then we can start to control them. But that's, I think the whole supply chain is highly dependent on process, because it is a true process from end to end. And it's a pretty easy process to understand. You make it somewhere, you make the product somewhere, you bring the product in from that place, you get the product into your ownership, and then you get it to your customer as quickly as you possibly can. What we're trying to do is eliminate all of the cost along that process. And once we know what the process is, we know where we can start identifying where the costs are, and then that's how we control it.
Great. All right. So that's really all we have, and I know we wrapped that up a little bit earlier, but we're certainly here to answer any questions and happy to connect with anyone on these topics, certainly. And again, my name is Tyler Davis. I'm based out in Tampa, Florida, and then we had Gerry Cahill, who is based out of St. Louis. And we love supply chain. It has its ups and downs, but that's what makes this job fun. So, I guess we can go into any questions or cover any other points at this time.
Sorry about that. Let's see. I don't see any questions. Does anyone have any questions that we want to pose? If you do, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, because I don't see any in the chat. No one.
Yeah, I'll make if we have a few minutes, if it's okay. Yeah, Tyler and Gerry, very good comments and information. Yeah, and one of the other things I'd like you to comment on, because it's a strategy I've used with clients and even in businesses I've run, is also to reevaluate on a constant basis, your clients, your agreements with them, your pricing, your profitability, because in some cases, firing or alleviating some of the front end business also can rebalance some of your supply chain issues on the back end. And you may find that, one of your clients, the one that's giving you the most trouble, the one that's not paying you, is also causing a lot of, a lot of effort on the back end on the supply chain. And by alleviating the front end, it actually frees up a lot of effort and a lot of, resources to be able to move forward or, gain better momentum.
Right.
Exactly, Jess. The customer is the center of all of this. We realize, and a lot of times we'll have customers clients who don't understand that it's not the product that's selling that customer, it's you and it's your company. And once they start realizing that the customer is driving the sale, then we can start eliminating that churn at the back end of the supply chain. Order changing, order commitment from the customer. If we don't have good control over that and don't have a good relationship with our customer, that ordering process, or even the quoting process will slow us down, and we'll be selling the wrong thing to that person if we don't get in sync with them up front. But they're driving the show.
Yeah,
and we
fully
got to be responsive.
Yeah. And I think too, that kind of plays into, the segmentation, right? And making sure that, you're segmenting customers based on however metric you want to do it on. And, we've seen companies do it on, revenue or pure gross margin, right? But, there's other things like looking at brand loyalty, looking at your, customers that are, projected to go a lot further. But also, you just want to be able to, make sure that you're spending the time, money, and effort on customers that, however you segment it, whether it's ABC or a different methodology. But, if there's certainly an E or a D customer, right, that's taking a lot of resource time or a lot of costs to make, to move mountains, you want to make sure that you're rationalizing that relationship and providing the right level of service based on, profitability and margin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah,
Good
question.
Wait, I think I see something. Can you address the best practices with respect to understanding the voice of the customer? This is from Ned W.
Yeah, Gerry, I'll let you take that one. I'll go into some detail on what I've done, but typically what we've done is, you want to first kind of define what customer you're trying to extract the voice from. Is it, the whole board of customers? Is a certain segment? Is a certain customer profile? Finding who the customer is, right? And finding the goals of what that's, voice of the customer practice or exercise is trying to do. Are you trying to understand, hey, how do I compete with other players in the market? Are you trying to understand, how do I do better from a service perspective? How do my prices, line up? What is your customer experience like? So understanding the goals and objectives of that, but also coming up with good, open-ended kind of survey questions to really assess their responses and how they view you in the marketplace. But Gerry, I know you've had some more experience with that. I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, I'll take you back to an experience that I had a few years back. That kind of sums up voice of the customer. I had a client who was building a dog food factory. Actually, it was a pet food factory, but we were building one of the lines was dog food piece of the factory. It was about a $2 million line inside of a $50 million building. And that line was built up. The product engineers had built the formulas for the pet food, and it was very high in nutrition. Everything was built for the perfect dog, and they started up the line and they started taking it down the line. They got the first products off of the line, and they took it to the testing area where they brought some dogs in and tested it. And when they put the food down on the floor with the dogs wouldn't eat it. It was terrible. They just had spent a couple $1 million on building the state-of-the-art dog food line, but one of the things that they failed to do was test the product with the dogs before it ever got to the production line. And to me, that is a very simple concept of how to put the voice of the customer together. The customer is a part of your company. The customer is looking at everything that you do in terms of creating a new product. Look at what Apple has instilled in its customers. They know that every October there is a new iPhone coming out, and the customer base anticipates that, and they want to see what's Apple going to do in 2022. What are they going to do in 2023? But they know in October there's a new version coming out, and if you like what you see, you can say, oh, I'm going to do it this year, or I'm going to pass and wait another year. The same way with the dogs. If we were developing the formulas for the food, which is great food, but for some reason or other, the dogs hated it. And the way you got to be is you've got to bring your customer close to you, and you got to be watching your competitors, and it's a strong team that you need to build of your marketing people, your engineering folks, your customer base, and your manufacturing people, believe it or not. And don't forget your supply chain people, because if we can't get the product to the customer is still not going to be happy. So it's a collaborative. I think on Tyler's slide, he had the collaboration of that really applies heavily to voice of the customer. I hope that answered your question, Ned.
Ned, you can unmute and ask your follow-up.
All right. Hi. This is Ned calling. Thank you for that did answer my question in part. I have another question, which is, how would you go about scoring risk and supply chain in the context of evaluating offshoring or nearshoring or onshoring? What kind of methodology do you use to evaluate risk?
Yeah, there's several different ways. Normally, what you need to base it on is, number one, you need a good strategy, a business strategy for your company, and an operation strategy. The way we go after it is we use that as the start, and then what we start saying is we start looking at several different things that are important to us. What are our needs, and what are those things that we have to have? And then based on meeting your strategy, you start taking those objectives and start putting a number to it. And again, as I just mentioned on the voice of the customer, you have to do that with a group of your from marketing through sales, through customer service, through vendor management, through production, through warehousing and distribution. And you start just, it's a grunt effort, and you just start looking at all of the requirements that you have, and you start putting a number against them. And then once you get that, then you have to cull it down to start understanding what is the most important to you. Some of these things are not easy. Doing something like that, I've done it for a chocolate manufacturer, and to get to that piece, I mean, he had a real good outcome at the end, but to understand how to score what was important to him was very important, and it took us about 6 weeks to get him to that. And unfortunately, he was more of an industrial manufacturer of chocolate, so he was upfront supply chain to some of the major companies that make chocolates, like See's Candy and things like that. So he was making the base products. What happened was, when the pandemic hit, the industrial side of his product completely cratered. It went under, and it was actually taking over. What actually saved the company was they had a small line of retail stuff, of retail product that was sold in Target stores and the Walgreens stores and CVS. That actually, when the pandemic hit, having a good understanding of his retail products outshined his capability over the industrial side of his business. So he was able to save it. But one of the things that we went through in terms of helping him to understand where his risks were was to say that he needed both the industrial side, but he could not overlook the retail side of his business, and that he accredited that to saving his business.
Yeah, I just want to add to the risk piece. When you do kind of like a risk assessment, looking at the nearshoring or onshoring, right? I mean, typically what I would do is I would define what risk categories are important to you. So, you could have a series of risks for financial related risk, environmental related risk, legal related risk, and then put it, different, weights or criteria to what's important to your business. For example, I had a client, a textile client in the U.S. who was thinking about doing nearshoring and or potentially going, offshore to Turkey or India, and they had a very unique dye process to their product, and they were really concerned about intellectual property and their process and the unique pieces about their product leaking out to the market. So in that instance, we ranked the legal portion much higher, and the IP rights and that sort of thing. And then, also in manufacturing too, you want to make sure, like, okay, does this supplier have the capacity? Are they manufacturing for other clients? How much capacity would they offer us if we were to engage them? So there's a bunch of different methods. I would just recommend kind of bucketizing those different quadrants per se, or different big bucket areas, whether it's financial, legal, supply chain, and then kind of drilling into, okay, what about those buckets is important to the business?
Well, there's also political risk.
Absolutely.
A lot of these markets that we are all aware of have been building And so I was wondering if you apply any sort of probabilistic analysis to that, or how do you approach things like this, the softer categories like political risk?
Yeah, so we definitely factored in like geopolitical risk, and that's a little bit harder to assess. So typically we have, outside organizations that specialize in research for, those types of issues. Certainly, you could, you with the geopolitical risk in today's world, that's certainly something to consider, especially with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And for instance, like kind of also talking about the economic risk. So for that customer or for that client who was thinking about, engaging Turkey, we factored in, hey, look at the Turkish lira, look what it's doing. So, it's those are all good things to include, especially the geopolitical risk. And if there's any turmoil, from a government standpoint that would potentially, raise the risk or escalate the risk for that certain customer or supplier.
All right, thank you.